So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second, the, the second session of the Global Leadership series. And today we're going to talk about what contrasts we find in Chinese and Western thinkers as philosophers influence cultures. So, first of all, I'm sure you all know these days, dilemmas are hard. So that's why they're dilemmas. So it's important to understand what drives us to have ethical stances individually, and also what drives organizations to have ethical stance, and how different drivers can influence the positions we take. And so I prepared a course while I was in China as a professor of management, where I helped my students develop critical thinking about their own thinking. And what we're going to do today is just go over a small part, but an important part of that course. And it's discovering and understanding ethical stances. So so what we're going to do is what I'm going to do is introduce to you meta-ethics rather than ethics. Ethical questions are questions like, should I cheat? Should tax evasion be tolerated? Should banks charge interest? Should children support their parents? And as I'm sure you're aware, different cultures have different answers to these questions, and different individuals in these cultures can have different answers to these questions too. What we're going to talk about today is more meta-ethical questions. How do we determine what is right and wrong? What system do we use to answer ethical questions, and how can we justify our ethical beliefs? So to start with, I'm going to take a page of Plato, because as I'm sure you are aware, we owe a lot to ancient Greek philosophers in present day Western civilizations. And Plato asks the following question: is something wrong because God says it is wrong? Or does God say it is wrong because it is wrong? Well, it's not really possible to answer that question. So wherever you draw your ethics from, whether it's from ancient texts, whether it's from the book of your particular faith, or whether you speak directly to gods, we have to use our own judgment to decide right and wrong. So now to the meat of this morning's session. So I'm going to present today 5 schools of ethics, 5 types of ethical approaches. Cultivating personal integrity, following nature, following the rules, utilitarianism, and skepticism regarding ethics. So the first school is cultivating personal integrity. And here we have 2 philosophers from China and the West who have close approaches, but not completely similar. First, Aristotle's virtue ethics that are founded in his approach of eudaimonia, which is living a meaningful life. Secondly, Confucius' Zhongji, which has been translated in different ways. In English, one translation is to be a gentleman. In French, we talk about men of honor, homme honorable, and essentially it comes to more or less the same principles. Is that you have personal values you cultivate, and these are what drive how you approach ethical dilemmas. There is one great contrast, is that in essence, Confucius has one extra virtue that is absent from Aristotle's virtue ethics, and that is the concept of filial piety, xiao. And this is a small, it seems a small difference, but it actually explains a lot in the contrast between Western and Chinese culture, and or I should say within attitudes today in the West, and the whole sphere of Confucian influence that is Asia Pacific, essentially. So what is filial piety? It is the duty you have to your father, to your mother, but also to your organizational father, your boss, or your political father, your emperor, your head of state. And this small difference is actually a great influence on different attitudes we find in business today, because there is no limit to what Chinese people can typically do in order to incarnate filial piety. Second school of ethics is for nature. And here we have two examples from China and the West as well. Thomas Aquinas, who was a Catholic priest in the 13th century, and Lao Tzu and his followers with Taoism and Taoism. So Taoism as a philosophy and Taoism as a religion. And essentially, what these two approaches are is that what to do faced with dilemmas is follow or nature. So there are also distinctions between Aquinas' approach and Lao Tzu's. For instance, when Lao Tzu produced the Tao Te Ching, the founding text of this, he didn't instruct people to do anything with it. He just said, okay, I did this, I'm leaving it here, do what you will, but this is what I see. And so his approach is not prescriptive at all. And in surveys I conducted in my classroom, I found that about 30% of students, my students, who were of course business majors, felt closer to this school than to the four others. So it's still very present in Chinese society today, I would say. Next school is a school of following the rules, and here we have Han Feize in China and Kant in the West. So this is Han Feize is the founder of legalism in China, and essentially this is about following the rules and about controlling behavior, I would say. context of businesses. And Kant, as you know, is a German philosopher, and essentially he talks about the golden rule. If something is right none of the time, it's only some of the time, it shouldn't be followed. But if you follow something, you have to follow it all the time. So, for example, if lying is wrong some of the time, you should never lie. So if you see someone with a knife asking you where your friend is, you should point him towards the direction where your friend is, because you shouldn't lie. So it's an extreme version of following the rules, as I'm sure you imagine. And it's the in the case of Kant, it is an individual ethical stance, but in the case of Hanfese, it's more of a societal project. It's about controlling people, whether they are mere citizens or whether they are rulers and ministers. People, in Hanfese's view, are inclined to evil, so we need rules to stop them from abusing their power or from creating chaos in society. Fourth school is utilitarianism. And this is, unless the most recent, it came out the Industrial Revolution, the Enlightenment in the British Isles. And it's a form of consequentialism. In other words, an act is judged not by what rules you follow, but by the consequences of it. It's very result-oriented ethical stance. And I'm certain that in business, you have already witnessed people clearly following utilitarian stances. And in ancient China, Mozi, who is roughly contemporary with Confucius, the legalist, and Socrates in the West, also developed a form of utilitarianism, and he's an important philosopher in Chinese history and philosophy, but he was never dominant in Chinese society. He's remembered as a good military engineer, and indeed, when you're an engineer, results matter. So I guess that explains that. So there are differences. The Moism is not as all-encompassing in his approach of utilitarianism than Benthamite approaches, but still it's an approach that we can find in both Chinese and Western philosophy. And finally, the last school is skepticism regarding any ethics system. And here in the West, we find the German philosopher Nietzsche, who was critical of conventional morality, but still believed that there was better or preferable morality than the one that dominated. And so his approach was to reject any systematic approach to ethics that was established in any society in order to better it. Whereas Shen Dao, who is Chinese and a follower of Taoism, was simply said that we don't have to follow any system. We just have to let things go as they are. So there are great differences between these two skeptics. Nietzsche was immoral and active, whereas Shen Dao was amoral. He said there is no morality, there is just nature, and passive, which implies a certain level of fatalism. So there we are. These are the five the five schools of thought. So what I would like to do now is ask you to think about which ethical approach you feel closest to, or approaches, as this may be. And Rita, I don't have access to the poll, so I guess you have to launch it.
Will do now.
No, I can't see it.
Yes, I just...
Oh, here it is. Okay. So, so please take your time, and I ask you to take a pencil and paper because it can be important in order to understand that you write. I feel closer to, for example, cultivating personal integrity because, and put the argument that you supports your perception that you're closer to this or that school. And while we're doing that, I'll leave the poll open for a while. We can answer some questions. I can take questions in French too. Je peux prendre des questions en français. Don't ask me to answer in Arabic or Chinese or ancient Greek. That's beyond.
I think if you check the conversation parts, there are some question going on there. Maybe you can
I don't see any.
The conversation, not the Q&A.
The chat? Oh, okay. Sorry. Yes. Okay. How do we conciliate globalization's rules and local culture in business? Who stand rules in society? Okay. So, yes. So if we look at these five stances, and if we look at business activity, there are clearly, historically, two schools that dominate, following the rules and utilitarianism. And if we look at individual practices within businesses, we can see which one is injecting which in business activity. So, for example, accounting, HR, law, naturally, are clearly following the rules in their approach to their practice. If we look at finance, marketing, economics, they're clearly much more result-oriented. So when we look at the ethical stances, and we have to understand that these five schools are archetypes in a sense. So we'll find a blend of several in different proportions in organizational practice. Leaders, depending on the industry and on their own personal makeup, their personal development, might very well have a stance that emerges as one of these two. But in recent developments, it's quite clear that values-driven behavior has made inroads in many organizations today. And if you look at websites, you will find sometimes corporate values, and that would be addressing what does enacting corporate values actually mean in practice. Can be very interesting to to discuss. We also find now with the notion of sustainability that people are addressing the relationship between organizations and the natural environment. So that would be the following nature. But following nature as a school of ethical stance abhors any collective organization. So you won't find it that much in organized groups, but you will find individuals within business activity who might well be very much close to following nature. And finally, skepticism is often a byproduct of business activity because many unfortunately do something but say something else, and that can cultivate skepticism in leaders with double standards and so on. So what we can, and when I say business activity, I could actually extend that to any organization, whether it's public, private, for-profit, social organizations, also have ethical stances that are more or less pure, so to speak. So, so don't feel that you have to comply with everything your organization stands for, but understand that if the organization is mature about what values it, what drives it, people who are aligned with the values of the organization will probably have a better time in it, and that would include, of course, not just daily satisfaction, but also recognition, promotion, and so on. So next question is regarding the ethics school. What are the main principles of ethics? Well, the main principles of ethics is to define what is right and what is wrong. And that is in basically, this is about decision making. And as I mentioned in text in my introduction, ethics is one building block of decision making. The other two in which I've done comparative studies between Chinese and Western philosophy are the logics you use for your decision making and knowledge building you practice. So you need all three so let me go to, I have a slide on this. So this is my whole ethics, logic, knowledge, meta-cognitive framework. And what we did today is this part, which is the richest in one sense, although it doesn't take up as much space as the others, because all of these ethical stances are very profound. And basically, if I look, these are where the values lie. In the logic part, this is E, this is K. In the logic part, I find the heuristics and the logical stances. And if you combine the values and the heuristics, it gives you goals, whether they're individual goals or organizational goals. And the knowledge produces representations of the world. And this will be the next talk in this ELK stream will be about that. And it combines the knowledge types and the knowledge sources and the ones that different people, different organizations prefer. And so if you combine goals, worldviews, and logic, you get decisions, and everything looks very messy now. And the decisions are what lead organizations and individuals to behave, and that's words and deeds. So communications and actions, and all of this is the hidden part of the iceberg. So the decisions are just below the surface. But as you see here, ethical values run very deep. And if you want to understand yourself, and if you want to understand others, it's important to go beyond the visible, observable actions and communications, words and deeds, to understand how people are wired to make this decision or that decision. So this is an approach that I find effective to understand what values are enacted. So you can take a press release, an annual report, and look for whether utilitarianism or following the rules or following nature or personal integrity or skepticism is expressed in these documents, and you will understand better who is opposite you. Oh, sorry, that's not what I wanted. So back to here. So we've 8 respondents so far. Let me see. So if you still want to answer the poll, please raise your hand. Okay. If no one raises their hand, I'm going to close the poll. Oh, someone has raised their hand. Okay, so I'll leave the poll open and answer more questions. So next question in French. Comment peut-on migrer d'une culture bureaucratique à une culture de compétition? Alors, je vais répondre en français. Je pense que tout le monde parle français ce matin, en tout cas en direct. Eh bien, ça c'est plus je dirais que c'est plus une question de conduite du changement, question d'éthique. Clairement, on peut être une culture bureaucratique utilitariste, légaliste, sceptique, ou dirigée par des valeurs. Donc, si on est une culture, si on est une organisation qui est organisée autour de valeurs communes et qu'on a une culture bureaucratique, il faut probablement réfléchir sur ces valeurs pour développer une culture de compétition. Si on est, et là encore je parle d'archétype, puisque comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, on trouve souvent une synthèse de plusieurs écoles dans les organisations en réel. Si on est une culture légaliste, il faut changer les règles pour incarner de la compétitivité là où on incarnait une bureaucratie. Ensuite, si on est utilitariste, eh bien, il faut changer les objectifs pour adopter une culture de compétition. Et si on est une culture qui rejette toute approche formelle de ce qui est bien ou pas bien, eh bien, il faut utiliser ça pour injecter du scepticisme dans les mécanismes bureaucratiques en faveur d'une culture de compétition. Donc, il s'agit plus, je dirais, qu'il s'agit plus d'un sujet de conduite du changement que vraiment d'un sujet d'éthique des affaires ici. Mais il ne faut pas ne faut pas espérer éliminer la bureaucratie, parce que la bureaucratie existe dans toutes les organisations, même si on a une start-up, il y a un peu de bureaucratie, même sans middle management. S'il y a juste les dirigeants et les chefs d'équipe et pas de middle management entre les deux, il y a quand même un peu de bureaucratie, ne serait-ce que parce qu'il y a des parties prenantes externes auxquelles il faut rendre compte, que ce soit des investisseurs, des autorités fiscales, etc. etc. Okay, next question. What about individual liberty as a natural law and rules imposed by the society as a dictatorship by the majority? Okay. So, okay, so the first issue here, which is a bit outside of business ethics, of course, but today we clearly gone outside, and I must say I draw upon two colleagues from the Department of Philosophy of Hong Kong University here, Kelly Inglis and Joe Law. So individual liberty, I do not believe is a natural law. If you look at nature, in the animal kingdom, there are other social animals, and there are also animals that aren't social, and they all have instincts, and the ones with higher cognitive functions clearly also think for themselves, are aware that they're thinking, so they have metacognition. And in some cases, we have been able to establish that they even have languages that are not just automated signals. So I'm not talking here about ants who communicate in a sense by pheromones, but in a very pre-programmed way. I'm talking more about some birds, some sea mammals, and so on. So would you say that these animal societies are dictatorships of the majority on the minority who just wants individual freedom? I'm not sure. I would say that mankind is one of the most organized of species, and the reason that that society is possible in a sense is because every culture in the world has concluded that together we can do more than individually. So that's why society exists, and that's why we have social ties. So there is, of course, a social contract which varies depending on the local regime, and how a minority is treated by the majority is indeed, some argue, what makes democracy work. So obviously, when we're talking about dictatorships, dictatorships are more often actually a minority controlling a majority. So arguing that in a given regime, that a majority imposes its will on the minority is, of course, and that can be taken. Oops, sorry about that. But I wouldn't. I would say that that's more of a political issue, and it doesn't change the ethics of the regime, of the nation, the political entity, the political organization, and it's perfectly fine to have different ethical stances as citizen within that regime. So what might the coronavirus crisis change in our ethics values? Well, on the one hand, I hope it changes nothing because because there's no reason to change our values to a new situation. Indeed, values are a good way to approach volatile situations without a plan. You just take in your stride what your values are, and then you just approach every new dilemma you're faced with by being guided by your values. Now, that doesn't mean that a reflection on your values is not welcome from time to time, but essentially, I would say that it's not about the crisis. It's about perhaps past actions could be revisited, and the coronavirus crisis has helped to reveal the unintended consequences of past policies, past decisions, and so on. This is not about being stubborn and not changing your mind. It's about being understanding that actions have consequences, and not following rules has consequences too. Being one with nature should be something we approach, we embrace, and of course we can incarnate that in the values we develop. So what I would say in a sense is that we have to work on our self-understanding, because understanding ourselves, and in this case our ethical stances, will help us understand others, because all ethical stance will create biases in us that we won't be aware of. And until we look into ourselves and what our biases are, we cannot easily detect the biases in others. So, yeah. So in other words, fish don't see water, or at least they don't see it until they step out of it. So what benefits accrue from business of ethics made part of strategy operation management? Okay. So, well, first of all, well, a strategic team or an operation team can better understand themselves if they understand their ethical stances. If there is only implicit grasp of their values, when faced with a dilemma, they may betray their values. There are studies that show that if you voice values before being faced with a dilemma, you're less likely to yield to it. Now, I'm not saying that everyone should follow their values all the time. We all face small dilemmas occasionally, and larger ones less often, hopefully. And no one is going to always be true to their values, or very few people anyway. So the point here is not to regret too many decisions down the road. So in other words, and that's what I tell my students at the end of my ethics class, is judge this course in 30 years, okay? Have you not regretted too many of the decisions you made in the heat of action? If you worked on your values, they beforehand, you will have a better guide to where the conduct you've had. And so this is what I would say is the benefit, is a sort of feel-good factor about the decisions that were made under pressure. Now, other scholars, and you can probably guess what their tradition is, will say, no, ethics is about following the law. Or ethics is about giving value to shareholders. So the first one, obviously, is following the rules ethical stance. And clearly, if you look at ethics departments in corporations, they're often populated by people with a legal background, because the point of these departments is not to get caught doing something illegal and exposing the corporation to litigation, or even the top officers to jail time. So there's a difference between ethics and compliance departments and ethics as expressed in philosophy. And here, what I wanted to do is inject philosophical principles, because philosophy is, I find, a good approach to understanding cross-cultural matters. If I take, on the other hand, the people who say, well, the business of a corporation is providing value to shareholders, that's clearly a result-oriented stance. So it's about giving dividends or increasing share value. And clearly that approach in its extreme is also consequences that are not necessarily beneficial to society as a whole. So it's important not to consider, and that's where stakeholder theory comes in. It's important not to serve shareholders and shareholders alone, whatever the cost to, whatever the social cost to the community in which the organization operates. So in short, I would say the benefits of business ethics to strategy and operations is taking a step back and having lucidity on the way you operate, or the goal, the strategic goal, the vision you're imprinting on your organization for the future. And once again, taking that strategy and operationalizing it is a change management exercise, and that can be the topic of a future seminar. So I think that's the last of the questions so far. So let's share the results of the poll. So we have few utilitarians this morning. That's in a sense unfortunate, because they could learn to self-reflect. We have people who cultivate personal integrity, and that, I would say, is in a sense expected, because people who come to these kinds of seminars often have how shall I say, virtuous goals for themselves. And we have a lot of people following the rules, which is also understandable, given that they dominate many aspects of business activity today. And we have one following nature, which is good, because we need people who are accept being one with nature as well. And this is another way to encourage diversity in your organization, is by cultivating people who give contrasting ethical stances, and that can lead to wider debate and richer decision making. So I guess this is the conclusion of the seminar today. And so this concludes the second of the Global Leadership Series. And next time, we're going to talk about another framework, which is called SESI. And the topic is challenges and opportunities faced when leading from home, which is something some of you may have struggled with in the recent months. So I thank you for your time, and goodbye, everyone.